You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
This is Steve Sansweet of Rancho Obi-Wan, and you're listening to the 602 Club.
Hello and welcome to TFM's local watering hole, coming at you here from the hidden realm of Themyscira, and I am just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and with me, as she is almost every single week, the one and only Themysciran that I know personally, Christy Morris.
Well, hello. Thank you so much for welcoming an Olympian here.
And what did you score on the Themyscirian games?
Oh, I won. I don't know if you noticed.
Of
Since,
course.
Diana got thrown out.
Well, we are excited to be here. Of course, this week we have a huge brand new movie to talk about with Wonder Woman 84. And we are definitely excited to dive into that. Before we get there, of course, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple Podcasts or any of the places, make sure you're subscribed. And, of course, if you're on Apple Podcasts, please give us a star rating review. Help the show grow. The more people that review us, the more the show can grow, the more it makes us raise in the rankings there on Apple Podcasts. So you can also find us on Twitter at the 602 Club. We're on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. So please do follow us in both places. You can find us online at Trek FM. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/Trek FM. And, of course, you can be a part of the listeners-only discussion group and talk about all of the shows that we're doing here on the network under the Babel Conference, which is you can find by searching for the Babel Conference there on Facebook. Huge thank you. Last show of the year, we want to say a huge thank you to our associate producers. Again, Ken Tripp, Davis Grayson, Ryan Millett, and Daniel Noah, for supporting us each and every year that they have been. It's been a long time now that they've been supporting the network and this show to make sure it keeps coming to you. And as we approach 2021, we could definitely use your support to make sure that these shows keep coming to you. It is definitely expensive to do this, and we could really use your help. Go over to patreon.com/TrekFM. See how you can be part of our team. Every little bit helps. Every little contribution helps. But again, as we head into 2020, if you like the network and what we do, really encourage you to please go over to patreon.com/TrekFM and help us out. So, Christy, there's just so much really to talk about with this movie, so I feel like it's probably a good idea for us to just dive in. And the movie starts off with us returning to Themyscira. And so I just wanted to know first just what you thought about that as an idea to start the movie. And then, of course, there's some pretty big setup, I think, in the themes for the film that this does. So what did you think and how did you feel about that whole sequence being our reintroduction to the world of Wonder Woman?
I thought it was a good jumping off point because obviously we began there in the first movie. I think that it's a good reminder, since it's been a while since the first film came out, to kind of start over with just a reminder of what Diana's upbringing was like, and also showing her growth as a person, or in this situation, I guess something that she still hasn't learned, which is about, the value of the truth and what it means to hold the lasso of truth and things like that. And I was a bit concerned when they first show her in the competition, because I thought that it was going to go the route of, and she comes in and beats everyone, even though she's a little girl and they're all grown women. So I was kind of relieved that they actually had her learn from it and not win, to be shown that, sometimes mistakes happen, but you can't take shortcuts and lie and then still win, because that's not really winning. And that you would not understand those things yet either when you're a child. So I thought that that was a really good way to show that, and in a way that would make sense to anyone. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I really liked the sequence. It was really fun, obviously, to get a taste of what Themyscirian life is like, the training that they go through to, be these great warriors that they are. And I'm like you, I appreciated that, Diana doesn't win, and that there is a lesson to be learned here, like you said, that she... And it's a multifaceted lesson in the sense, the first one obviously is that she's reminded by Antiope that, nothing good is born from lies. And, she did not finish the race as intended. She didn't go the long way. She cheated because she got knocked off her horse because she wasn't paying attention to what she was doing. That idea of nothing is good is born from lies, and the idea that you can't take shortcuts really play out into the rest of this film. So the beginning here in Themyscira is really about setting the stage for the things that Diana is finally, like, obviously this point in life, like, it's 100 years later, and Diana still is going to have to finally put these lessons into practice in a way that truly tests whether or not she's going to choose the correct path or if she's going to choose the easy path. Mm-hmm. And, I think, to me, immediately they start off with the lesson. And then the rest, they tell you what the lesson is, and then the rest of the movie is going to, hopefully, as we talk through it, is going to be about watching that lesson actually play out and juxtaposing different people either learning that lesson or not learning that lesson. And I just really like that because, when you kind of look at Diana there, she's told that the truth of the matter is that you did not finish the race as intended. You cheated. You took a shortcut. And that really we come to see throughout the rest of the movie. But even here is that when you look at, and Antiope even does this, she says, look at our greatest warrior. She did not take the easy way. She worked very diligently, patiently, on honing her craft and becoming the best warrior. And what does that mean? It means, we need experience. Like, experience in life is what teaches us, right? And the long way is a good teacher because nothing can replace well-earned experience. And so I really thought, obviously this movie starts off immediately with the lessons that it's kind of trying to go for. And it gives us one example of what that is. And the rest of the movie is then about trying to kind of play that out. So, but I think you made a really good point was, it's been a few years since we've been with Wonder Woman just by herself. Obviously we had Justice League come out, but this is our first return to just her as a solo character in her life and everything. And so, kind of being reminded, like you said, of being back here and what her life was like. Just the experience she had there, I think is a good way to kind of start the movie to kind of ease you back into this whole thing. Because, not only that, the last time that we saw Wonder Woman on her own was also at the end of, World War I. So a ton of time has passed since then. And so, this kind of, again, it gives a good way to start off thematically, but I think it's just a good way to reintroduce us back into the world of Wonder Woman, like you said, where she came from. And now we're going to spend the rest of the movie where she is in this time period. Because obviously, too, we all know, we've seen her past this time period. So in some ways, this is also going to be a movie about kind of filling in a part of her story since there's so long between this and the next time she would show up chronologically, which is Batman v Superman. So, this kind of helps fill in some of those gaps. What was her life like? What was she learning? all of that kind of stuff. So I think this just created a really fun beginning to the film, but it also created a good thematic beginning to the film as well.
And too, I want to piggyback on that and say I liked that even though after that point in the movie, it's then set in 1984, they don't lean into too much the 80s pop culture aspect of that era in our actual history in this movie. You know what I mean? Like they really could have gone heavy with the traditional 80s music, or, with showing some more things in pop culture that were going on in the 80s in the movie, but they didn't. They went instead with just big picture and stuck to the elements that they're trying to teach rather than leaning into the culture of the 80s.
Yeah, I honestly tend to agree with you. I've seen some places where people have talked about that idea, and I am on your side in that. I don't think that this just is a wall-to-wall cliche of 80s cliches, and I think, we'll talk a little bit later. I think there's some reasons why they kind of pull out these ideas with being set in 1984, but I think one of the things that this allows them to do is set a time period that is obviously, again, you're filling in her backstory from this to all the way to BVS. So there's some lessons she needs to learn, and it helps make some connection to we know that she wasn't really out there as a big superhero in the sense that everybody knows her name and everything. Mm-hmm. This allows you to tell a story in that time period where it's easier for her to go unnoticed. Not everybody has a cell phone camera, and, it's much easier for her to have anonymity because, yes, there are CCTV type of cameras in a mall and stuff, but those are easy to take out. And again, not everybody has a cell phone camera where they can just capture Wonder Woman doing whatever she's doing. So that is also a good place to set this. But, I think it's another one is it's kind of a fun era to be able to put Steve into. So, the first movie was all about Diana being the fish out of water. And in this movie, we reverse that. Steve is, he's the fish out of water. He's the one who's experiencing life for, the first time in a way that completely blows his mind that so we get to experience the life of that time period and the time that Diana is in through him, and in many ways, again, it is a complete reversal of their, places in the first movie, and I think that's one of the things that kind of makes it fun as well. We play into some of the 80s stuff where they're trying on clothes and everything, and, he keeps coming out in different outfits. So we have some fun with it, right? But it, I think it just creates a fun time period to be in, a fun, covering for the rest of the movie. Honestly, this is a movie that you could have probably set in any time period, in the sense that you could have found a way to make this a movie now, and you could have done that. But they choose this time period, and I do think I was thinking of some reasons specifically, kind of being called 1984, and talk about it a little bit later. But there's some ideas of why I think they chose this time period.
Right, other than it being just a very strong backdrop to use for any movie.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really interesting, obviously, and something I want to talk to. It wasn't on the outline, but one of the things that we get here is kind of a connection with, in Batman v Superman, we learn that Wonder Woman really hasn't been out there as a hero in the sense that everybody knows her name. Everybody knows when Wonder Woman shows up. She's basically been staying. She's been doing things, but she's doing her best to stay hidden. So she becomes a myth to people. She becomes an urban legend of this person who kind of swoops in and nobody's really sure what happened. And how did you feel about that? Did that work for you, especially when we kind of think about the continuity of the films that they have so far?
Yeah, that worked for me completely because anything, at least that I have seen of Wonder Woman as a character in general, she's never really been the one that sought the spotlight. So I like that they kept that element of it of, she cares about doing good and about, the world being a better place rather than notoriety for herself. So I thought that was a good way to handle it, but then also cute for the movie as well to have her then, be able to swoop in and fix things, but not be jumping out in front of the cameras trying to get the attention. That she's got this whole other life, sort of going back to Superman, Clark Kent.
Well, and I mean, what's fascinating to think about is that, like Wonder Woman and Superman are very much in the same boat in the sense that they don't age like normal human beings do, right? I mean, she's a demigod, so she will legitimately probably live for, who knows,
Right.
She could live for hundreds of years, thousands of years, who knows, right? So, and like Superman, who's constantly recharged by the sun, and renewed by the sun, who knows how long he could live. So, what is interesting here is to actually kind of play with that a little bit about the idea of like, you noticed in the last movie in Wonder Woman, we saw her being based out of Paris. So in that, that movie begins with her being in Paris after the events of BVS. So here we see her in her more classic era and area. In the comics, she's very much a part of Washington, D.C. most of the time in the comics. So we see now that she's moved from D.C. to the City of Love at some point in those 20 years. So it makes sense for her that she's somebody who would have to have moved unless she wants people to know who she is, because she doesn't age, So you can only get away with that for so long till people realize, wait, you look exactly like you did 20 years ago.
What's up with you? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting when you think about that, like how that, I think, plays in really well with just the connections and the kind of continuity and them thinking about, they had to have thought about that. Plus, again, her first movie plays the fact that she lives in Paris at that point. Well, this gives us an opportunity to play with in the comics that she is based in Washington, D.C. in the comics. And so this allows us to do that without messing up any of the continuity. So setting it in the past in the 80s gives us that opportunity with no issues. So yeah, that's really fun. So, okay. One of the big contentions that I've seen just perusing social media and stuff about the film is this idea of granting wishes and this stone. This stone. And so I just first wanted to kind of talk about the rules of the stone as we know it from the film. And what we know is that it grants wishes, but it also takes something. Not only does it take something, but it takes something that you value in possession, you most value in possession. That's how they determine this. And it's something that's been around for at least 4,000 years in various places around the world. Like I specifically looked up all the places, and it starts 4,000 years ago, and the last place it ends up with the Mayans, and all the places that it pops up, the civilizations end up collapsing. And this apparently comes from the god of lies with Dolos, or there's many other names. And the way Steve describes it, which is really interesting, is from, he calls it the monkey's paw, which is actually an old short story. I thought that was really interesting, that they kind of really tie this to something that Steve would have known, because the monkey's paw came out at during the 1800s as a story. So this is something Steve would have been very familiar with, because it was also turned into like a play. It was a short story you would have read and those kind of things. So that part to me was really interesting. And the story here itself basically kind of plays out this idea of, they found this like mummified monkey's paw, and it can grant you 3 wishes, but the consequences of getting those wishes are really hellish because you're tampering with fate. And
right.
So these characters need money to pay off their last mortgage. They ask for the money, and then their son dies.
In the story of the monkey's paw.
Yeah. And so, and because of the death that happens, which happens at work, they're paid £2,000, which is what they need for their last mortgage. And the mother, mad with grief, wants to use the paw to bring their son back. And so she wishes for that. And a few hours later, because the cemetery is about 2 miles away, there's a knock at their door. And Mr. White is terrified that whatever this thing is at their door is going to be, the mutilated remains of his son, that it won't really be his son. And so he makes the 3rd wish, and the knocking stops. So that's kind of the overview of like where they're getting this idea of what they're using. So first, I just wanted to ask, with all of that said, like, how did you feel about this stone that they use in the movie, and did it make sense to you? Did it work for you? Were there any inconsistencies that you found or you thought like didn't work?
I think that their introduction of it was really good. We've all been familiar with similar kinds of stories. And actually, this was one of my favorite stories in general, The Monkey's Paw, because, that classic be careful what you wish for kind of message. And that makes sense with them trying to do this with this stone. The one inconsistency I saw that maybe you felt as well, or anyone else out there maybe saw, was when Pedro Pascal actually, his character wishes to be the wish stone. That kind of made sense to me, or at least I could suspend my disbelief to go along with it. But then when he says that he can get what he wants in return for people's wishes, they started to lose me a little bit, because it made sense that the stone might take something of value from the wisher, but the stone itself wouldn't have had a particular desire of something it wanted aside from that. So it didn't really make sense to me about how he would then be able to take good health, for example. Yeah. So,
I mean, for me, my rationale behind that, and I think that's a great question because it's something that I was thinking about too. So the stone, as just the stone, it takes what you most value, right? Mm-hmm. And so since he's the stone himself, he's the one granting wishes, he's able to then take what he wants from them as payment, like the thing that is the juxtaposition. I grant you this wish, but I'm going to take something you value. And so you notice he's always taking something that person values. Like he takes that oil tycoon's security force. So to me, it kind of made sense that once he became the stone, the way it works is that it requires a payment, basically. You get your wish, but it requires something from you.
And that now that it's part of a sentient being, it could be whatever the person decides they want.
Exactly. So that's how I took it. So, but I think you do raise a good question, because it is something, they do leave some of this stuff nebulous. And so I think that's really why I wanted to talk through all of this stuff to see if we could make sense of it. And I think that, again, to me, that made sense that once he's the stone, he can require basically whatever penance he requires, whatever, or that he wants as the payment basically for granting the wish.
Well, and I guess the other part, sorry to interrupt you.
No, please. This is great.
So I was curious too, what you thought about him having to physically or not physically touch people in order to have the exchange happen. Because it made sense initially to me as well with they had to be holding the wish stone to make their wish and then have it happen. But he wasn't technically touching people when they were broadcasting his face on screens. So did that kind of fall apart for you?
I mean, it didn't fall apart too much. I mean, this is where it like gets real comic booky, you know, right? Like, as, you know, the Reagan wannabe is telling him, you know, that the particles can reach, you know? So, like, okay, I'll go with, again, it's a magic. It's a comic book movie, you know? So, there are points to the logic to which, you know, I'm not gonna get upset about that don't make complete sense, because, again, it's a comic book movie, and I need to just be able to check some of my brain at the door in the sense that, like, there are going to be some things that are just completely not possible. So, yeah. But no, I mean, yeah, to try and find a way to do that. I mean, you know, they're tying into the whole idea of like Star Wars, the missile defense program, and everything at that point, the laser defense space program from the 80s. So, and that was a little like tongue in cheek kind of moment. So it didn't bother me too much that was the case. You know, I think it was interesting too, because you know, you see then that there are two people that make wishes. There are three people that make wishes before he becomes the stone. So that's really interesting. I mean, you have Diana, who made the wish. And then you had the guy who asked for coffee. He got his wish.
True. And
then, of course, you have Barbara, who makes her original wish, which is, you know, her original wish is to be like Diana. Smart, strong, sexy, popular, basically. So you that I think will play into, you know, later on in the movie. And so I think one of the really big things that I have then with this movie, and I've heard a lot of people be very frustrated with this whole thing, is that the way Steve comes back, the way that they bring Steve back, and the fact that he's in someone else's body instead of just being brought back to life. So first, I just wanted to ask you about that. Do you think they should have just brought Steve back to life, as in, boom, his body is back as well as his soul? Or do you like the way that they play it here in the movie, and did it make sense to you that this is the way it would work?
I think that if you look at it from the standpoint of bringing back Steve's body, technically he would have been sort of like the son in the story of, you know, like a zombie, because unless they like brought him back in or forward in time, his body would not be the same anymore. So I wouldn't have done it that way. I think that the way that they've handled it is actually a good way to do it. I think it just could have been explained better. Because initially when we were watching and saw this strange guy chasing after Diana at a party, and then they show like it's Steve, it was really off-putting, because you're going, but why though? You know, like there was no explanation as to how it would end up that way until later. And no one else was handled that way. Right. Maybe, you know, if they had established that could happen in some other way, like another person in the office wishing for a loved one to be brought back or something. Right. I think just more explanation would have helped.
Yeah, one of the things I thought, and a friend of mine on Twitter and I were talking about this, and he had an issue with it, and you know, he mentioned the fact that, you know, you can blink walls in and out of existence. You know, you can missiles can appear and disappear and all these things, you know, so all of that can happen. So you can't just bring like somebody back from the dead. You know, to me, my immediate thought when this happened was the idea that I know from like fairy stories. Bringing somebody back from the dead is never cut and dry. You can't just pop somebody back into existence in any fairy story, right? In Aladdin, you know, the genie's like, I can't bring anybody back from the dead. It's not a pretty sight. I don't like doing that. You know, like it's not, like you said, it's not a pretty thing to bring somebody back from the dead, you know? And I also thought of like Harry Potter, the Resurrection Stone. It brings somebody back, sort of. It brings back a part of them, a ghost of them, basically, almost a memory of them. And so, to me, the fact that you can't just, that even magically, even the god of lies, it's not just, you can't just pull somebody back from the dead. You know, and in Greek mythology, you know, you can pull a soul back, but it never, I mean, again, you know, to me, all of this kind of seemed to play very well with all of the type of stories that we're kind of basing this off of. And I also think that, and I don't know if you thought about this, but like, so if Steve literally came back from the dead, like his body and his soul are back, if she has to give up that wish, she's basically killing Steve. Do you want Diana to literally have to kill Steve again so he dies twice? Like, I don't think that we necessarily want that to be the storyline, but we do want Diana to have to learn the lesson of giving something up, right? And so I think this is the best way, honestly, to do the story, because she, I mean, legitimately, if she unwishes Steve being back, she killed him again. And she's responsible for his death at this point. So I don't think we really want that to be the story for Wonder Woman, if you ask me.
And then, too, in doing it this way, for me also worked because then they're really showing how anytime that you lose a loved one, that you have to move on or you lose yourself. You know, that she's pausing the rest of her life, her purpose as Wonder Woman and everything, just to be able to have Steve back. And he has to tell her again, this is not the way it's supposed to be. Well, you have to move on.
And hasn't she done that? Hasn't she? She talked about that with Steve, right? When he was challenging her, and she's like, this is the only thing I want, you know, and she even tells Barbara, I don't go out. I don't see people. She lives this very cloistered life. She lives a very solitary life. And she's, like you said, she's put her entire life on hold because she doesn't know how to move forward. And isn't that part of the lesson that she's still learning about Steve's death? You know? So I heartily agree with you. I think you're absolutely right. I think that it plays into this idea of the truth. You know, the truth of the matter is, she says specifically to Lord, she says she never wanted anything more, but he's gone, and that's the truth. Like, the truth of the matter is you cannot bring somebody back from the dead. The truth of the matter is that he is dead. And so I love how Steve tells, you know, you don't have to say goodbye. I'm already gone. I was never really here. And so Steve coming back like this kind of connects with that first lesson in the movie about not cheating. You can't cheat things in life. You know, experience. And this is kind of the ultimate form of that, you know. But in the end, if you bring Steve back, he's not really back. It's hollow. Because it's only a part of him it's just like this piece of him that's back. It's not the full Steve. Even though she only sees what she wants to see, it's not really real, you know? Like, and it kind of it reminds me in some ways that, like, you know, in Star Trek V, where Kirk says that he needs his pain, like, Diana needs this pain. The loss of Steve helps change her in the same way that, like, the loss of his parents changes Bruce. And as much as she'd like to have Steve back, he's already gone. And so to me, it makes it a much stronger lesson this way. And I think it also helps us connect. Like, when I think about this in reference to Batman v Superman and the relationship then that they're also going to have Bruce and her in Justice League, I think she feels that connection to him because they've both had to learn very hard lessons from losing people that they've loved, but still coming together even when it's difficult. Bruce lost his parents. He lost Robin. She's lost Steve. She's also lost countless of other people that she's known have died because she's outlived them, And so I think learning this lesson that only experience can teach her, and Steve coming back like this makes perfect sense to me. And I think it really works. And on top of that, I would say, I believe I kind of see Diana in this. She's losing not only her powers, but I think she's also losing some of the things that make her who she is, which she kind of starts to lose a little bit of her love and compassion. She doesn't really seem to care about the dude who's Steve's body Steve has overtaken his body. But she also is willing, basically, for the longest time in this movie, to sacrifice the entire world just to have the one thing that she really wants. So it's a crisis. It's a crisis of conscience here.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing we see in the whole movie, is that it's Diana learning again that lesson that you and I have mentioned a lot on this show, is the selfishness versus selflessness. And that even though she generally does know the difference between right and wrong and seeks the truth and wants the world to be a better place, that in this moment she becomes selfish again and is desperately hanging on to Steve so hard that she is, like you're saying, willing to give up everything else that she usually stood for, and has to finally realize that that's not the right way. And I wanted to add, too, that it's not what Steve would have wanted, that he gave his life to save everyone.
And to make sure that she could save everyone.
Right. And so he wanted to go when he did. And there's only honor in that, and that she needs to keep that in mind when she, thought about bringing Steve back and stuff, that he wouldn't have wanted it that way.
And I mean, and he even tells her that, I did what I did so that you could save the world. Mm-hmm. And basically he's like, I'll always love you, but I'm already gone. And again, I think that lesson is so much stronger because it helps reinforce the idea of that, here, that what she's holding on to isn't really real. But we do that so often, where we try to hold on to things that aren't really the truth of the matter because they, quote unquote, make us feel better, or we think they do. But it really reminded me of, in the Bible, Jesus says, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? And that's kind of what Diana is learning in this. Like, she is on the precipice of gaining the whole world, which to her is Steve, right? And yet she's willing to forfeit her entire soul, which is the very thing that she has been, which is the character that has stood for love, and sacrificial love. And she's about to lose that if she doesn't allow herself to live out that same sacrificial love, in the sense that she will sacrifice the thing that she wants most for the good of others. And to me, I've just seen a lot of complaining about this online, but it creates an incredible thematic element, and I think it's played so beautifully because Gal Gadot kills it in this role, again, as Wonder Woman, and her with Chris Pine, they have such chemistry, and I think she makes you feel every single second of this loss. And every single second of the joy of having Steve back, even if it's just for a little while. And so, yeah, I mean, those two together are gold, and I can understand why they wanted to find, some way to bring him back for this film. And the way they brought him back, and him being back, and then his leaving the film the way he does, I think it upholds the character Steve, but I think it helps cement the character of Diana to who she's going to be in the future. And I'm really excited, honestly, because, you know, obviously we get to see, you know, she makes that choice in BVS to come and help Superman and Batman. And she makes that choice to expose herself, you know, to a place where people might realize who she is in this mess. And then we know she chooses to join Bruce, you know, to fight what's going to be coming. And she is kind of, I think in many ways, playing out the lessons that we see her learn here, which is her life is not meant to be lived in the shadows, and in the sense that, like, to not be a part of a group, you know, to not allow her life to have any meaning beyond her just trying to kind of do some good here, but not actually have any true life for herself, you know, like to live life to the fullest. So anyway, yeah, I love all of that. So, in the whole wish fulfillment thing, you know, we have Barbara here and, you know, obviously her choice. And so what did you think of her story, obviously, and, you know, of Kristen Wiig playing this iconic role from the comics of Barbara Minerva and Cheetah?
So for me, she was unfortunately the disappointing part of the movie. And I hate saying that because I've always been such a supporter of Kristen Wiig in particular. Her comedic style is just right up my alley, and I want her to be able to do anything she wants to do. But in this role, I felt like the character needed to be written a little bit differently. And I felt like she also could have done it a little bit more justice. In particular, I'll say it bothered me in the scenes with her being attacked at night by the random guy on the sidewalk, because it didn't really make sense in them trying to explain why he was attacking her. It seemed to just kind of shy away from really saying what he was coming after her for. And then he's just suddenly blowing up at her. And then too, later on, when she comes back and is getting vengeance on him, it seems then too over the top cruel, in a way that really didn't make sense for her at that point to be. I don't know. It felt like even just the way that the character was written to have the climactic anger build up, it didn't have enough things happen in order to get to that point for her to be that cruel to someone. I just felt like overall that Max Lord was a stronger villain than she was written to be.
I can understand some of that, and part of the thing with both of the villains here is I almost feel as though maybe I talked to my wife about this. It's like I almost wish that the movie had one or the other, and not both.
Yeah.
Just because I think it would have helped. Like, you could have crafted this story to really, it's a more intimate story between Barbara struggling with wanting to be like Diana, you know, and we have that struggle here. She thinks she knows who Diana is. She thinks she can judge the book by its cover, that Diana is popular and wonderful and beautiful and all these things. She thinks she knows what her life is. But to quote Ricky Bobby, you know, from Talladega Nights, you want to see what my life is? You know, like, Diana's life is not what people think on the outside, you know. Barbara
Right.
doesn't get that, you know, even with their conversation that they have. So that whole, like, have and have not thing, I think would have been really interesting to see them struggle with. And so I think you could have written the movie where it was just those two together, and it'd be a much more intimate film in that way, and not so world spanning. But I personally thought Kristen Wiig was fantastic in the movie, and I thought she did a really good job as this character of Cheetah, and I liked the turn, because I thought what was interesting about that scene where she's beating the crap out of that dude on the sidewalk is she doesn't even realize what she's doing until she's it's brought to her attention by the guy she brought food to a few days earlier. And I don't think she realizes her change necessarily until it's too late in her temperament. And then at that point, she's kind of basically pulling an Anakin Skywalker in the sense that she doesn't care. She just wants what she wants. And she's not willing to give it. She's holding on to it so tightly, she's willing to destroy everything basically to get it. And I can see, where you're coming from. And I kind of almost wish, like I said, that it had been the case where maybe it was one or the other. But I mean, for what we got, I thought was really interesting. And this was fascinating to me. So the wish that Lord granted her obviously gets taken back because he is the resurrection. I mean, he's, the resurrection stone. He's the granting wish stone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so once he renounces his wish, all the other wishes he granted are gone. But we don't know if she renounced her wish. We only know that she got taken away the cheetah part of herself. What we don't know is that she's not still as strong as Diana.
Mm-hmm.
Which I really like that they leave that ambiguous. And obviously, Patty Jenkins already said that was left ambiguous on purpose because I think they've got plans for Cheetah in the future. So that's exciting to me that they're not just going to leave this story here because they are doing a third movie. They've already greenlit the third movie now. So I'm glad to know that we'll continue that story so that it's not just something like, well, we're done with that, So I'm at least glad that that's the case.
Yeah, and I do think that, like the fight scene was really cool between the two of them and that they actually did make her look good as Cheetah. I just wanted more motivation for her to get to that point of anger of, then all of these other actions she takes making more sense to me. It just felt like it rushed a little to that point for her.
Yeah.
But I still thought, that once it got to those points, it was interesting and looked cool. And then especially having her and Max working together. But ultimately, I think the more threatening villain to me with more stakes was Max.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with you in that sense. I do feel like, this movie's long, and one of the knocks I would give it is I do feel like it probably needed to be restructured a little bit to allow some of those motivations to work out more so, especially in that place. Because, like you said, Max Lord with Pedro Pascal, for him, this is about... I mean, he's the antithesis to the lesson that we got at the beginning, which is, nothing good is born from lies, and that you can't take shortcuts. Because his entire world has been taking shortcuts. He's been trying to find the easy money. And what he's found is that you can't do that. And once he gets the opportunity to do that, he continually just wants more and more and more. And it kind of reminds me almost, remember in Shazam, they had the sin of gluttony, and that's what he's guilty of, is he just, nothing is ever going to be enough. And if there wasn't a better example in a movie of a character of somebody who, it doesn't matter how much you have, it's never going to be enough. It's him, he is just the poster child for that. And so I think, and I really liked that about his character. And his character's actually kind of grown on me more. I saw the movie a couple of times now. And, I think it's a strong storyline to see play out. My only criticism of it would be, I just wish, he's quite a douchebag, right? But I kind of wish that he had been a little bit more menacing. Like, Barbara was actually the more menacing character, I felt like, villain-wise, and he was just kind of like this big buffoon. And I wish that he had just a slight more menace to him. And honestly, he's completely different than he is in the comics, because in the comics, he's able to control people's minds and make them do what he wants, which is super scary and creepy. And like, he's one of the worst villains in DC comics because of that. And in fact, in comics, Diana actually killed him because of his ability for mind control. So I just that's the only thing I would say about it. Pedro Pascal was great. He's having a fantastic time. He's acting his heart out. I just wish he had just a slight more menace to it.
I can understand that. He never felt menacing to me in that sense. So I do agree with you there. I think that the one thing though that I really loved about him was that he was just always very willing to make a deal, even in the sense of, like you're saying with like gluttony or whatever, but it almost even made you feel like people making the wishes were making a deal with the devil, because the way that he has that scene with the president of the United States has him holding hands with him, telling him what he wishes for most. It was so creepy to me. And, you're seeing the toll that it's taking on his physical body, because I guess we're sort of saying that, he's taking on so much wish-wise and trying to give, and maybe not sleeping, not eating, whatever. So it's damaging his body, was a really cool way to show that he's overdoing. To the point of like his eyes are bloodshot, his ear is bleeding and stuff. And he's like, no, I'm fine. And till it finally gets to the point of he realizes he's going to lose the number one thing that mattered to him. And that was his son.
Yeah.
When before he took for granted that his son would always be there, and he needed to take care of these other things first to make his son proud of him. He never needed to do that. Right. He was just always pushing him aside. Mm-hmm. And so I do want to say, like, the reason that I can say I did really enjoy watching this movie is because there were two moments that stuck out to me, and that I even sent you a message and said, I'm bawling my eyes out, crying. And that was when Steve had to leave again, because it was so meaningful in a good way. Like we were saying, that he wouldn't have wanted it this way. It's not the same. It's just a shell of a person when they're being brought back from the dead like that. And that he was, never really back anyway, but her finally letting go, that made me cry. And then this was the other part that made me cry. And it was seeing he does decide to renounce everything for his son.
Yeah.
So those two moments for me, like, made the movie. I was just blown away by how powerful those moments were for me personally. So I looked at my husband and I even said, Pedro is so good.
Yeah. And I was thinking about that too, as you were talking. And one of the things that we see here is, he's been a character who's never thought about the consequences of his actions. Really? And the consequences of his actions are coming into play in a way that are about to take away the very thing that he cares about. The only thing he kind of cares about in his life. And he realizes how much he cares about it. And part of that, I think, is, Diana has the lasso of truth around him at that point. And I think he can finally see the truth because she is speaking the truth. And to me, this is one of the biggest things about this movie and why I think it's so good, because the idea of truth in this movie is fantastic. Diana says to Steve that what creates the power for her lasso is not her. It's not her truth. It's the truth, because the truth, she says, is bigger than all of us, which means we can't change the truth, regardless of what we want or will. Like, the truth, she says, should be enough. Like, it's beautiful, and in the end, it will set us free. And we have to look to the at the truth of what our wishes are costing us, and if they're worth the cost. And to me, the reason I thought it was really interesting is that this movie is named 1984. Is, the book 1984 is all about Big Brother and the party making people believe lies. Whatever it is the party wants you to believe, that's what they they hold truth, and they make truth, they say. And so, like, I think that's the thing that I just really like about this, and the reason I think that the movie is placed in 1984 is because it comports with a lot of what Orwell was talking about in his book. And, one of the things he says as a quote from that book, he says, the party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and your ears. It was their final and most essential command. Like, that was the idea, that they would create reality. Or, here Pedro Pascal, he's trying to create his own reality. But this movie is about that, no, truth is immutable. Whether you want it to be or not, Steve is dead. He's not coming back, right? Diana lost the race because she cheated. Like, these immutable truths, we can't just make reality in our own image. Reality is reality. Truth is what actually comports with reality. And that, to me, for a movie to say that these days is huge. The fact that the truth is bigger than all of us, it's not something we determine, and we can't exchange the truth for a lie. And so I was just blown away by that. And I think, we need more movies like that are talking about this idea, because I think it was beautiful. And it really, to me, it really hit me very difficultly, that we need to be living in light of the truth, not just a truth we make up for ourselves, which makes it not true.
Exactly. Well, and I think that along those lines too, it was so meaningful because it brings up all of these big points that are experienced across humanity that we all deal with and have to either move on from or let it overcome us. Loss, or wishing that you had more than you do, or, being a different person because you idealize what they're like. These are things that everyone experiences probably at some point in their life, and you have to figure out how to let go of and be yourself. And so I really love that it sends this ultimate message of the truth, and of being yourself, and of realizing what you already have rather than constantly wanting more. Because like you were saying, sometimes more is just more. You're going to want and want and want and never be able to fill that up.
Yeah. And I mean, I love what you were saying there, because this idea of the truth of who you really are, because it's not until the very end of the movie where Max Lord admits to himself the truth of what he is, which he's a loser. He is a liar. He is all of these things. And they always say that admittance is the first step to recovery. Like, you have to admit you're an alcoholic. It's by dealing with the reality, dealing with the truth of what something truly is. And to me, one of the things that's really interesting is that, they use the same music from BVS. At the beginning of that movie, you remember there's this scene where Bruce's parents are being buried. His parents are shot and then they're buried. And then he falls down the well, and he learns what he calls the beautiful lie. And what we learn later is what he tells Clark, which is that the world only makes sense if you force it to. That's the beautiful lie. And I love that they use that same music here, because I think they're juxtaposing the fact that Diana is telling us the beautiful truth. And the truth of the matter is about life is you can't have it all. You cannot fight or change the truth. And only the truth can set you free. And so we can't make our own truth, as Bruce was trying to do in BVS. And we have to be grounded in the truth that comports with reality. We can't create our own realities or truth, because as the movie says, and it shows, nothing good is born from lies. And so to me, like, having that music play in that moment as Diana is telling this to the world, she's telling the world that the world is a beautiful place and you cannot have it all. And that is the truth. And the truth is enough. The truth is beautiful. Look at what your wish is costing you. And I think this idea of, just wanting more for more's sake because we think that's going to make us happy. That's not what's going to make us happy. And what is the truth we kind of were talking about earlier about Diana's life? She's cut herself off from the world and from love. She's kept herself separate and away from community. Like, she's learning that that's her truth, that and not just her truth, that is the truth of her life. Like, that's what has made her life to the point where she's willing to almost sacrifice the entire world just to get Steve back, because she hasn't been living in a way that is actually living. And so I just really love that. I thought they did such a good job with, I read an article, they said that they had that in there as the temp music, and then they decided to keep it because, the universe is connected, and they thought, well, this works so beautifully, and Zimmer did the score, so they just decided to keep in. But I think thematically, it plays so beautifully because of the way that music is. I mean, it was literally titled "A Beautiful Lie," and here what we're getting is the beautiful truth. And Diana is finally giving us the beautiful truth, which is the lie that we all think of, which is you can have it all. No, you can't have it all. You have to decide what's actually important to you. And I mean, again, the fact that a major Hollywood movie is tackling that kind of issue to me was phenomenal. I think that they do it really well. I think it plays out really well. I think it's subtly enough done. But it's in your face enough so you can't miss it. And I like that.
Yeah, that's how I felt as well. So, ultimately, I feel like there's so much that you can take away from this with the themes and life lessons. I think that it ends up, for the most part, being a good, family-friendly movie that you could show, to teach your kids about truth and lies and, growing up and letting go of things that don't matter. And, that, like you said, you have to accept at some point that you can't just have it all.
Right.
And that isn't the thing that's going to ultimately make you happy.
Yeah. And I mean, it is a kind of, it's so interesting how I think the themes in this movie really play into very key things that we get, spiritually, which is, in the end, you shall know the truth and the truth will set you free, and that's really nice that this movie is playing into that. Now, I just want to juxtapose all that with saying there was one moment that stood out to me where they were just so kind of and show, don't tell, we talk about all the time, Christy. And the moment when she's like, I hate guns. I was like, Diana does not need to say that in a moment where she's crushing guns with her hands. Just allow her to crush guns and let it speak for itself. You do not need to tell that to the audience.
Yeah. And that was one scene that did kind of bother me in general, was just, I think that the whole mall scene also to me just felt a little too silly for the more serious tone you end up getting from the movie. But I get that they had to bring it back into present time somehow and, show that she's kind of living in the secret or whatever. But yeah, I think for sure you didn't need to have that piece of dialogue. I think it's definitely always more powerful to just show us what you're trying to say rather than including it in that way. And I think that maybe that scene could have been done a little differently altogether.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the things that I feel like they did do in that movie really well is that they subtly introduced this idea of this world is one in where people are kind of greedy. We see people overeating, or, carrying around massive amounts of food, mall food and stuff. And it's like, that's showing me a message just by allowing me to observe it without telling it to me.
Yeah.
And that'll connect then with the message that we kind of see of seeing a world in which is ready for the message that Lord is trying to give them, which is you can have it all. You can have everything you've ever wanted, and so again, that scene, it was like, I like the scene is fun, but then they do this thing that which they just, they tell you what they want you to hear. And it's like, it's always just better to just show it to me. So,
and I will add too, I think that they did a great job of doing the showing, not telling, as well, when they first introduced Maxwell Lord and show that his entire floor of the office is empty.
Mm-hmm.
He's got no employees left, but yet he still thinks that he's got this lavish office that he deserves to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, living out he's literally living in his own reality of his own creation, and again, the movie's very much about you can't have that. So, What did you think of the action in the movie? Because we get the battle in the mall. There's everything that happens in Egypt. There's also, of course, what happens at the White House, and then, what we get at the radar station as well. And so how did all that work for you? Did you like it? Or
I think the two most powerful action scenes for me were the fight with Cheetah and the radar station at the end. But I thought that the battle in Egypt was pretty good. I really liked that they had Steve even coming in to save her a little bit, because, she's kind of lost some of her powers because of her wish. And also I felt like maybe that was part of Barbara's cost, was then getting Diana's powers from her. Maybe she's kind of sucking it from her to take them on. I don't know. I that may just be my headcanon, but I like that then, they're showing she gets shot and, she's actually in some danger, and Steve comes in and helps her, and it takes more than one person this time. It's not just Wonder Woman comes in and everything's easy. So I thought that was a really good message for that.
No, I think you're right. It does play in really well with everything that we see, and it really helps show especially with what you get there at the White House, where, Barbara straight up asks her, she's like, what is this costing you? She throws it back at her, and we see how much it's costing Diana. It's not just her powers, but, it is her compassion for the world around her. And so I thought all the action was really good in the movie. I loved the stuff in Egypt because it reminded so much of me. It felt like an homage to Indiana Jones, where she's under the truck, and so I thought that was great. I loved her, trying to save the kids, and that there is an extent, for how far she can swing. And I love that they didn't just make up, the idea of the momentum, like where she's going. She can't just switch momentum, and everything. I thought that was all great. To me, the action sequence where she's fighting Cheetah was pretty cool. I know some people have had a problem with the fact that Cheetah is able to destroy her armor, because that armor was meant to keep out the entire world. But for me personally, I don't know if this makes sense to you, but I rationalize that is that Cheetah asked to be, in her second wish, something that's never been seen before. And so if she is something the world has never seen, it didn't bother me that she could start to tear up the armor. And specifically, too, because in the comics, Cheetah is on power level with Diana. I mean, she's beaten Diana's
super strength.
Yeah, she's very, very, very strong. So
yeah, that would make sense to me, too. Yeah, that was kind of how I rationalized that to myself as well, was that she wasn't like the rest of humanity, that she now, because of her wish, had this like superhuman strength and ability with her claws and everything to be able to get in there. So
yeah.
And what did you think also, I meant to ask because I think we kind of glossed over it, but of Diana and Steve in the plane and then Diana basically flying?
Yeah. So one, I thought it was really smart how they do the invisible plane, because obviously in this version of Diana's history, which is also in the comics of the New 52, she was the daughter of Zeus, so she's a demigod. So she's able to fly, she's able to do a lot of things like that. So rationalizing the idea that her father was able to make Themyscira disappear from the world, and the fact that like she says too, she's been working on this for like 50 years, and I like she tries to hide a coffee cup and it didn't go well, right, because she lost it, which was funny. It's a funny little joke. So no, I thought that was great, and it makes the invisible plane not cheesy. Because obviously she won't need it ever again, but it made sense for the movie of them trying to escape. They needed a way to get off radar. So, I thought that it worked really well, and it was just a fun wink at the camera. And the fact that Diana may have always had this power to fly, and it took her kind of connecting with those elemental elements, of air and wind and all of those things. And again, she's a daughter of Zeus. So I just thought it was a really poignant moment that, it's Steve that helps her realize that she has these abilities, and she tries them out because of Steve, and so I thought that was great because it also helps us, have a fun power for Diana to have later on, and again, this is where it's been really nice that, Snyder, and I got to give him credit, he sets up these characters in his films, but he doesn't ever utilize every single one of their powers in his movies. He allows the directors that are playing with these characters to do that themselves. And I think that's really cool, so we add one more power to Diana's, tool belt. And I think it was great that we, allowed her to be able to fly, but also be able to have the fun of, the invisible plane, and that, scene with them in the plane is so beautiful. And, I felt like all the action in this movie, I really enjoyed. I will say, I do felt like they could have, spent some more time on all the CGI in the movie. I wish that they had, but it never pulled me out of the movie terribly. So, but I feel like, if you're going to do a movie like Wonder Woman, come on, guys, get it right, so.
Yeah, I think there was just one or two places where that kind of bothered me as well. I think it was just especially in the fight in Egypt. I think at one point they try to show Wonder Woman like she's running up to the trucks, and it looked pretty clearly like she was just running in front of a screen. And it's like, okay.
Yep.
But otherwise,
I think that's the moment that stood out to me the most. That moment right there, it's like, oh, that's not good. You needed to find another way to do that. So, yeah. I got to ask you, obviously Hans Zimmer does the music here for Wonder Woman 84. And, I already talked about the fact that, they use the cue from BVS there that I thought worked really well. But what did you think of the score?
I thought it was beautiful. I, especially love all of the moments when, like when she was fighting Cheetah, for example, and they bring back in her theme, Wonder Woman's theme. I think that overall it works. And I always like Zimmer's work anyway, so I don't think I was gonna be disappointed in that. But I did definitely want to mention again that I'm glad that they didn't lean into throwing in traditionally like realistic 80s popular music like Madonna or something like that, like I've seen in some other movies. So I think that even though it's set in the 80s, you didn't need to do that. I think it was great without.
Yeah, no, I mean, I loved it. And in all honesty, I think it may be the best score I've heard this year. You know, other than the work for The Mandalorian, you know, this was fantastic. It's a gorgeous score. He created an incredible new theme for the Themyscirans and Themyscira and Wonder Woman that I really loved at the very beginning of the movie. I thought was just gorgeous. It's so joyful and like, I mean, to quote a Christmas song, it's joyful and triumphant. So I really enjoyed it. I've been so enjoying listening to it. I wish, though, that cue that reuses the theme from Batman v Superman was there. I would have really liked to have had that on the soundtrack itself. Maybe they'll do like a deluxe edition or something. I don't know, which I would love. But yeah, Zimmer really knocked it out of the park here. He created one of the best scores, I think, of the year. So, and if not the best, honestly, I'm hard pressed to think of any film this year, and I've seen so few movies this year that have had a better score than that. So yeah, I guess all in all, then, what would you rate Wonder Woman 84?
So when I really thought about it, I would say overall, I really enjoyed this movie, and it meant so much more to me than I ever expected that it would, on a deeper level. And I would go back and watch it many times over. So I really have to give it an earnest 4 out of 5 cheetahs, I guess I'm going to say. Because, yeah, there's just so much to unpack. And even though there are these little nitpicks we have, for me, I can look past that stuff and look at the bigger picture of things that I love about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, this has been something I've been really going back and forth in my mind about, because obviously, you know, I thought that there was a lot to really like in the movie. And, you know, we talked about all of it. And I personally think this movie, you know, I've seen a lot of people talk about how this movie is a mess or doesn't really hold together or anything, but I feel like it could answer legitimately any challenge that anybody has about whether or not this movie holds together, and where they don't think it makes sense. I think it all works. And not only that, I had a great time watching, especially the second time. The first time for me watching movies like this are always difficult because regardless of whether I want to or not, I always have so many expectations going in. Mm-hmm. And many times it takes me watching a movie a second time to be able to let go of those expectations and truly enjoy the film. And just for what it is, not for what I thought it was going to be or any of those kind of things. And so I think for me, I've really come to be able to see this movie in a really good light. I really enjoyed it. I had a good time with it, and I would definitely be watching it again. And I'm happy that I got a chance to actually watch this. You know, as frustrated as I am that I'm not getting to see this in the theater, I'm thankful that we got the opportunity to see it. You know, I wish I could see it in the theater, and maybe I'll get that chance, you know, when theaters open, and maybe this will play again, you know, and I'll get a chance to see it on the big screen. I'd love that. But I think that there are a couple things that we talked about, though, where I did think that this movie could have been slightly reworked a little bit to just help with all, like you were talking about earlier, like with Barbara and her storyline and that those elements. I think this story maybe just some editing work could have helped or something. So in the end, I'm going to give this 3.75 out of 5 Steves. So because he's not really all back. So, but no, I mean I really enjoyed it. And if anybody wants to know, on Letterboxd, you can see my ratings for all the DCEU films, and this is literally right in the middle. Yeah.
Nice.
Well, Christy, it's that time of the show where we go into recommendations. So kind of wondering what you're going to recommend to everybody here this last week of 2020.
So it's interesting. I was thinking about it, and I had to go with something that I guess I wouldn't so much say if I'm recommending or not recommending. Oh, I guess I'll say I'm recommending it. But I actually just started reading The Princess Diarist by Carrie Fisher, which was her last book. It came out 5 weeks before she passed away in 2016. And she's someone that I've looked up to my whole life. And, in spite of her flaws. And I'm really interested to see everything that I've heard about this book. And, I know that even though it alludes to her obviously biggest role ever as Princess Leia in the name Princess Diarist, that it's supposed to be about her personal life. That it's not so much a story about her playing Leia, as it is just the struggles and triumphs that she went through as a person. So I'm really interested to get more into it, and interested to see if anybody else has already finished it, what you thought, if you want to talk about it with me. So I'm going to recommend it.
Awesome. Well, I am going to recommend something that I think everybody should read. I think it's as timely as ever, and I'm going to recommend you read 1984. So by George Orwell, if you've never read that. So I think it's absolutely an essential read for 2021, and just an essential read for the times that we're in. So it is fascinating how sadly he has predicted so much of our future. So, and I hope it's not the case that it's that way, but wow. So definitely check out 1984. So, well, Christy, if people do want to catch up with you and see what you've got going on outside the 602 Club, where can they catch up with you?
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Bespin Bell. And when I'm not here on 602 Club with Matt, I do another show with my friend Amanda called Sabers and Spells on the Skywalking Through Neverland network, Skynet. And we basically do a short form show to talk about everything geeky under the sun that we want to talk about that month. So we have our next episode coming up in a week or two in January, and hope that you'll catch up with us there. We're on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook at Sabers and Spells.
And you could find me on most of the social media platforms out there under Matt Rushing 02. So just search for me there. And if I am on that network, you will find me. You can also find me here on the network doing Literary Tracks as well as The Orb. Literary Tracks is about the books and the comics of Star Trek, and then The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I do those with Chris Jones. Over on the Nerd Party Network, doing 2 shows. One is called Owl Post, do that with Dre Kaufman, and we are walking through every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, 1 chapter at a time. And last but not least, you can find me doing Aggressive Negotiations, where I'm talking Star Wars each and every week with John Mills, and it is so much fun. But thank you so much for joining us.
And y'all come back now, you hear?